Welcome back to another episode of the Bible. Wait, what? I got it better that time.
That was better. It was a little bit higher.
Yeah.
Now you just need to make it a bit longer.
Longer. Okay.
But
So I'll work on it as we go along.
Your voice is warming up
Yeah.
after having recorded one episode already.
Yeah. So happy Monday for all those listening as it comes out. So
IRL.
yes.
Or
IRL.
IRT in real time.
In real time. Yeah, that's probably more applicable on that one. So yeah, so we're jumping straight into chapter 1. So if you missed yesterday, we did an overview of sort of what 2 Samuel is and the context and where it sits. And so if you missed that one and you want to sort of know
Get
that
some context
before you jump into
probably a good idea.
go
It's only
and-
15
go and have a
minutes,
listen.
but it'll help you to get some context for chapter 1 through 5
Yeah.
this week.
So so jumping straight into chapter 1. So as we mentioned in the previous podcast, it's the follow on from chapter 31, and it's where David learns that that Saul and Jonathan are dead. So at this point, he had no idea that they were dead. We're in the middle of this sort of big civil war kicking off between those who followed Saul, those who are following David, and it's just pretty much all kicking off. And now it's sort of that aftermath once the king dies. So once Saul dies, what happens? What happens from there? And that's sort of where we are now.
That's where we're at.
Yeah. Pretty much it starts off. So after the death of Saul, David returned from his victory over the Amalekites and spent 2 days in Ziklag. And then on the third day, so this is 3 days,
3 days later.
After the death of Saul. So it's very, very early on. A man arrived from Saul's army camp. He had torn clothes, put dirt on his head to show that he was in mourning, and he fell to the ground before David in deep respect. And this man came to tell David what probably news that David would want to hear.
Yes, definitely.
So he's coming, showing that he's mourning because being someone who was underneath Saul, so he's one of Saul's people. So he's in mourning, but he's turning up to David to share this news with him, and he's assuming that David...
It'll be good news
for David. And pretty much he just came and said, Saul and his son Jonathan are dead. And then David's response, like I said, David demanded of the young man this question that he asked. He says, how do you know that Saul and Jonathan are dead? Which is, you want
Valid
proof.
question, you need proof, don't you?
You could sort of see that the heightened emotions there he demanded.
Yeah, as soon as he heard he was just in distress, it would appear.
Yeah. And he answered, it happened to be on Mount, is it Gilboa?
Mount Gilboa.
Gilboa. And there was Saul leaning on his spear with the enemy chariots and charioteers closing in on him. When he turned and saw me, he cried out for me to come to him. How can I help? He asked. Saul responded, who are you? And he said, I'm a Amalekite. And then Saul then begged him, come over and put me out of my misery, for I'm in terrible pain and want to die. So the Amalekite said to David, I killed him, for I knew that he couldn't live. So he even put that in there. So he even said, like, whether it's justifying or not, but maybe just expressing the state that Saul was in.
Yes.
That he knew that he couldn't live. So then I took his crown and his armband and brought it back to you so that you knew pretty much what had happened. So so at that point, the Amalekite thought that they had done the right thing. So they saw that their king was in trouble, like was hurt, and followed their orders pretty much to put him out of his misery.
Yes.
And then knowing that David would want to know that news, and that what the repercussions of that would be, that most probably would be that David would then become king. So there was that David would want to know this news, because then it would be for him to step into that power vacuum that would be sitting there. And then he gets a response that maybe he wasn't expecting.
Because this Amalekite is thinking, he's making out, bad news. He's probably so he's an Amalekite. He's a foreigner. And this is actually, ironically, this is who David's been fighting. So there's a lot of interchange of race, ethnicities, or nations around. He's probably a slave or someone working who's defected to Saul's army, to the Israelite army. And so he's been there, seen that, somehow got a hold of it, and he's brought it to David, and he's assuming that he will get a reward.
Yeah.
That's what it is. He'll get a pat on the back or some kind of special treatment or some kind of a reward or some kind of promotion because he was the one who brought the good news to Dave.
Yeah.
And don't we want to do that sometimes? We want to appear in the best possible light.
Yeah.
To
We
get
want to
the
be
promotion.
the person that brings the good news, the positive news.
Yeah. That's right.
Or perceived positive
Or perceived
news.
positive news. That's right. But it's really scheming to get ahead. And that's what this dude seems to be doing.
Yeah.
He's trying to get ahead by painting himself in the best possible light, bringing the good news, hoping for some kind of reward.
Yeah.
But he doesn't get that, does he?
No. And I think even him wasn't the, I'm trying to think back to how Saul actually died when it spoke about it.
It's interesting here because 1 Samuel chapter 30 or 31, wherever Saul's death is, actually doesn't say that. It actually says Saul said to his armor bearer, because he'd been killed, Saul says to his armor bearer, draw your sword and run me through.
Yep.
And it says the armor bearer was not willing to do it.
Yep.
So Saul fell on his own sword.
Yeah.
So we have two conflicting accounts here. What do we do with two conflicting accounts? I think the most logical one that scholars would agree is that the first account's probably what really happened because it shows the honor of the armor bearer.
Yeah.
The second account is this scheming. What's the word I'm after? Like this Amalekite is using the situation
For his own advantage.
Yep. That's what's going on. And it comes back to bite him.
And another one, so if we think back into 1 Samuel, when David, which foreign army was it that David joined to fight?
So that was the Philistines.
That was the Philistines. He was fighting with the Philistines.
He'd allied himself with the Philistines.
Yep.
But he was never really totally with them.
No.
He pretended he was with them, and he'd go. And all
So I
the
couldn't remember if it was
while
them.
it was them. Yeah. So all the while he's fighting he's aligned with Achish, king of Gath, from the Philistine town. It says he would go out and do raiding parties, and he would tell Philistine king that he'd been raiding against the cities of Judah. But actually, what he was doing was raiding some of the other cities, and then sending the spoils to the people of Judah.
Yep.
So that when the time came, we're going to see this shortly. He's already won the hearts of the people of Judah, his own people. But it said he'd raid a town and he'd kill them off, and he wouldn't let anyone survive. It's terrible. Wouldn't let anyone survive to go back and tell the king of Gath, the Philistine, hey, by the way, Dave's double-crossing you.
Yeah.
But he was double-crossing him.
Yep.
And that's the Philistine army that has now come to war and fought Saul and killed Saul.
Yep.
And David said, I want to go and fight with you. And it was the other Philistine commanders, not Achish, the other Philistine commanders who said, no way, he's not coming. He'll switch sides in a hurry.
Yep.
What better way to get favour back with Saul than to switch sides in the middle of the battle? So that's why he was not allowed to go.
Yeah. And there's every chance it probably would have.
And he may well have switched sides. We don't really know. We're left with some guessing as to what would have gone on there. But based on the fact that he was kind of fighting for Judah under the radar, if you like, cloak and dagger, would have indicated he probably would have in some degree.
So then we pick back up. So in verse 11, so David and his men, they tore their clothes in sorrow when they heard the news. They mourned, they wept, they fasted all day for Saul and for Jonathan. And then, it says, and for the Lord's army and the nation of Israel. So it's not just... And it says because they died by the sword that day, and I know that's just a term. It's not literally died by the sword. Is not necessarily the interpretation on that one. It's
they died in battle.
They died in battle.
Yeah. So the army had been largely disseminated. That's not the word. What's the word for
dispersed?
Well, killed. Yeah. A lot of them had been killed. There was a lot of
killed, and they all ran off.
And all they ran off. So exactly. All that took place on this particular day.
Yeah.
And David and his men were mourning. And just to remember, David had not been allied with Saul for a long time.
Yeah.
So he still saw that as his home country, even though he'd been an enemy, not by his choice, but by Saul's choice of Saul and therefore of Israel for some time. So we've got these two conflicting things here. We've got his long-standing flight from Saul because Saul was trying to kill him. We've also got to bring into the mix this long-standing deep bond of friendship with Saul's son Jonathan, who he's just found out has also died. We've also got to bring into account this conflict he must have about Israel's army, who he knows he's got this call of God to lead, but also these are the very army that Saul's been using to track him down. This is a complex emotional soup that David finds himself in.
Definitely. And then that's I think and that's where we see that continually play out through these chapters here. Just the way that David acts and the way that he, goes about things, you could see that he still sees himself as an Israelite. He knows that God's anointing is on Israel and that he's been called to be a part of that. But then he also is honouring those who are in power at that place.
Yes.
Because he knows that if they are there, then God's anointing with them also.
God's anointed them. Yeah, that's right. So he's not going to scheme his way to the top. He's going to let God bring him to a position of authority when the time is right.
Yeah. So then again, after that, so David asks, "Where are you from?" So similar, Saul asks the same thing, like, "Who are you?" Or like, "Where?" He says, "Who are you?" And then it said, like, where David asks, "Where are you from?" And he said, "I'm a foreigner, an Amalekite who lives in your land." "Why are you not afraid to kill the Lord's anointed one?" David asked. This is where you start thinking, "Oh, hang on,
this isn't going well."
Yeah.
You saw a few drops of sweat start to appear on this Amalekite's forehead.
Hang on, that's not the follow-up question I was expecting. And then David said to one of his men, "Kill him." So the man thrust his sword into the Amalekite and killed him. You have condemned yourself," David said, "for you yourself confessed that you killed the Lord's anointed one." And that's a hard thing where it's I suppose you're in for him, like, you even think, so even if it was like you're at war, they've gone to war, your king is dying, or the king that you are following is dying, if it's not directly your king, and they ask you to do something, and you're from a different culture, like you're not from that same culture that they're a part of. So you saw that the armor bearer said, "No, I'm not going to do that."
Yep.
But where, say, if he did do that,
if this was true,
and he did do that,
he got the raw end of the deal, is what you're saying.
Well, for him, he was just doing what he was asked to do by his king.
Yeah, exactly.
So he would think then, and he wouldn't have seen anything different, even if the story was true or not. He wouldn't have known that wasn't what he should have done.
Right. So let's assume that he doesn't know what is the common practice.
Yeah.
What is the purpose of how things work in this nation? So he has committed a grave sin in naive error. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
If that's happened? Yeah. Yeah. What do we do with that? That's quite confronting, because if that's the case, then the story would indicate that David's judgment was way out of line because the guy did what he thought was right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And not saying that he might not have known. See, if he was part of that land, like, he would have.
Yeah, he may have known.
He may have known, but there's every chance that he might not have known, because that's different to what he was asked. It would have been that if he didn't follow the rule, and someone found out that he said, "Oh, the king asked me to kill him," and I said no, and I left, then there's every chance that the same outcome would have happened to him.
Precisely.
So
I think without knowing all the surrounding story, we're limited to what's in the context. Yeah. So I think the best context is to assume the way the narrative has been told between the end of 1 Samuel and the start of 2 Samuel, I think it's a fair assumption to say that the writers are wanting you to assume this Amalekite was politically maneuvering for his own gain.
Yeah.
I just think we have to accept that that's the
and
case.
Whether or not he knew what the outcome would be by doing it that way is also, like, if you're maneuvering for your, like, for that political gain, to give yourself honor or anything like that for another situation, you wouldn't go and do something that you knew would get you killed, if you know what I mean. Like, so that's why I think that he probably didn't know.
He didn't expect he was going to get killed.
No. He thought that what he was doing is he was bringing good news to David, expecting to get some sort of reward for that.
So he's definitely expecting good news. He's not expecting to be killed. That's definitely true. I mean, we can imply that, because otherwise he wouldn't have come in the first place. He would have hightailed it out of there.
Yeah.
So I guess the issue then is he doing this as a loyal subject, or is he doing this with a degree of selfishness?
Yeah.
But I think you have to assume it, without being totally dogmatic about it. I think we have to assume that he did it for selfishness' sake and political scheming, and therefore didn't show enough respect for Saul, because David could have been completely wrong. I mean, he doesn't seem to hold court. He doesn't seem to get any facts. He's just asked the guy, and that's enough for David to do that. Now, we wouldn't do that today.
Yeah.
We would not put someone to death I mean, they weren't supposed to do that without 2 or 3 witnesses. But I think we have to assume that David has enough evidence to go on to do what he believes is to honor the anointing and to realize that, and this man comes under what would basically be capital punishment because he did not honor and respect the value of the anointing of King Saul. By being the one who ultimately killed him. It's still challenging. Because the dude's about to die anyway, and so you could argue it's a compassion killing. You know, all kinds of things about this. I think we're supposed to just pull out of that there is a degree in which we need to recognize that there are leadership structures in the world, in the church, et cetera, that are anointed by God. That is not, we'll obviously talk about it in other contexts as well, that is not a carte blanche permission for people in positions of anointed leadership to claim that, to demand that, to say, you shall not touch the Lord's anointed, because that is where we've overstepped our boundary in our anointing. If I'm a leader and I'm telling you, you have to obey me because I'm the Lord's anointed, I have way overstepped my boundary. If I commit some kind of crime, maybe it's fraud or something, you know, I commit some kind of crime as a leader in the church, not saying I have, but if hypothetically, if I had committed some kind of crime of fraud, I can't just stand around and go, you can't judge me, you can't do it on the Lord's anointed. No, we have judicial systems in place for a reason that enable me to be still held to account for my behavior. Any leader, whether it's a church leader, a political leader, if we have positions and authorities and other levels of government to try to bring balance and counterbalance to that, we should respect those. In this context, there is none of that. So when David in 1 Samuel, when he's running from Saul and he has the opportunity twice to kill Saul, and his famous saying is, "I will not touch the Lord's anointed." Now, note the difference there. It wasn't Saul saying, "You will not touch the Lord's anointed." It was the subservient one saying, "I will not touch the Lord's anointed." So this is about us as individuals recognizing the anointing of leadership upon other people and then choosing to submit to that because I'm submitting to them as unto the Lord, while all the while recognizing that doesn't give them absolute power. There are structures, and there should be structures. If you don't have structures of leadership in the workplace, or that's why whistleblower is such a big deal these days. In Parliament House, we're seeing this in the church. If you're part of a church where you don't have these kind of accountability structures in place or in a workplace, I don't think it's healthy because they should be there. No one person should have absolute authority and power. But that does not mean that we don't choose to respect the leadership anointing on someone.
Definitely. So then it moves on so we get that sort of that scene happens, and then
that
David.
Guy's dead.
So he's done. And David moves on to then he writes and composes a song, a funeral song for Saul and Jonathan.
And commands
it to be taught to the people of Judah.
Okay.
So where it's not just something that he's written, I suppose, just written out of his maybe grief and pain and mourning to help, deal with that himself. But then he's also then commanded that to the people. So again, it's when songs are written about kings, it's something that normally would be taught to the people. It would be something that would be then shared so that people can use that song to then honor the king, the God, the Lord's anointed. And this is for David, this is no different.
That's right. And he's written this and taught it to the people of Judah, who are the ones he will become king over for the next 7 years. So it's interesting that he is telling his people who Saul, he's David's their king, but he's still honoring your previous king. So he's using this song to try to break down civil war. It would have been written to say, hey, we still, they might want to fight us, but we don't want to fight them. That's the kind of thing he's trying to say.
And you would think, knowing if you know David's story, that pretty much just Saul chased down David and tried to kill him pretty much through
many years.
And a lot of it was through we talked about that's what I remember from one of the podcasts, whether it was actually Spiritually he was tormented, whether it was whether it was God or whether that was
a demon,
or whatever. But there was that David did nothing to bring this against, to bring it upon himself.
David was actually overly faithful to Saul.
Yeah,
always.
Even when Saul tried to kill him, he still came back.
Yep.
A couple of times, and then Jonathan even had to try and talk him back one time.
Yep.
And the final time, Jonathan was still trying to talk him back and saying, "Look, let me go and find, and then I'll let you know whether you should run or come back." And that was the final run.
That was the last thing.
We're finished. And so this is the man that if someone's going to write something bad about Saul,
David's got every right to
do that.
Thank God that one's done, gone away with. I finally got him off my plate,
Yeah.
Wish that person was out of my life. That's the kind of thing that we think if we've, got an enemy in the workplace or whatever, wish they'd get out of my life.
Yeah.
But David has a different attitude.
Yeah, completely different.
Love your enemies is what David's doing here.
Yeah. Your pride and joy. That's the first line. Only Israel lies dead on the hills. It's so you're starting off with the fact is saying that Israel's pride and joy, your king, the Lord's anointed, lies dead on the hills. And it continues that the whole way through. It's this continual uplifting and honoring of both Saul and Jonathan.
And he doesn't separate them. I mean, as we said, Jonathan you could understand.
Yeah.
Jonathan's one mistake was not being with David when he was with his father. Honestly, that's what cost him his life. Otherwise, he would have been David's right-hand man.
Yep.
I've said this before. And if he had been, it would have saved David a lot of hassles because he would have taken Joab's place.
Yeah.
And we're going to see Joab's a screwed up dude.
Yeah.
So he made that one mistake. But other than that, he was fiercely loyal to Dave.
Yeah.
But David puts them both together because it's king and prince.
Yeah. And then, because they were both anointed, because he knew that the anointing was on that family.
The family, that's right.
So pretty much it's just this whole lifting up, and then we should be then mourning and grieving for them, not just for one.
Yeah.
And it's just that constant. And then it finishes and then he even says verse 26, how I weep for you, my brother Jonathan, how much I loved you, and your love for me was deeper than the love of women. Oh, how the mighty heroes have fallen, stripped of their weapons, they lie dead. And it's just this, just nothing but honor and just on both Saul and Jonathan. And it's just this outpouring of grief and instructing the people of Israel to weep and to mourn, but not because of what they have done in terms of a bad thing, but in terms of who they were and the fact that they were anointed by God and the mighty works that they did, and in the protection of Israel and the building up, and the raising up of Israel. It was very much a positive. It was there as a positive outworking of their grief and mourning.
Yeah. And I think why that can be useful to us is because there'll be times where we have to grieve Jonathan's, and there'll be times where we have to grieve Saul's. And most of us, I think, if we're honest, if we had a Jonathan who had lost, or the relationship severs, or someone leaves a church, or someone leaves our workplace, or something happens, it doesn't always have to be physical death. We can grieve the loss of that Jonathan, and we would understand this kind of emotion. Yep. There are other times where things go awry with people who we think we're better off without, or we've had challenges with. But the call of this song, this dirge that Dave has written, is to tell us that we need to recognize the anointing in every human being. Because I know we talk about the anointing on the leader, but every human being, it's the Imago Dei. God has created all of us, every human being in his image. There's something of the divine image of God in every person.
Yep.
So I think it's incumbent upon every person, upon all of us, to honor and value the anointing and the dignity of others.
Yep.
And if we do that, it will not allow us permission to rejoice at the fall of someone else.
Yeah.
I'm glad they're gone. They're out of the way. Now it's my time, like the Amalekite was doing. I think it doesn't afford us that. And that's the lesson from chapter 1, is that we need to treat every person with dignity, even if we don't agree with them. Even if they're like Saul, they're coming after us. Even if they're out to get us, They are still a human being created in the image of God. Let's find a way to speak well of that image in them. It doesn't excuse the wrong they do. David didn't do that. So in 1 Samuel, when the time when he nearly cut the corner of his robe off, he stands up and he says to Saul across the canyon, he says, "Why do you think I'm out to get you? I'm not. Here's the piece of your robe. I could have killed you, but I didn't." It happens both times when he has a chance to kill Saul. And he says, "I will not touch the Lord's anointed." And he actually says to Joab and some of the others, he says, either his time will come and he'll die in battle, or just he basically puts vengeance back into God. He's not saying that what Saul was doing was excused. He's not letting Saul off the hook. He's just saying, I am transferring my right to pronounce judgment and fight for vengeance. I'm giving that up, and I'm giving it over to God, and I trust that he will bring justice in the right way at the right time. That's always a better way to view it, because anytime there's one finger pointing at someone else, there's usually three pointing back at us anyway. So I think if we can just have that attitude of David, I trust that God will bring me to my position. He will vindicate me in his time when he's ready. Vengeance is not mine, it's the Lord's kind of thing. I think that's what we can learn from this. It will certainly help us. And we're going to see it. I mean, David might be thinking, right, even at this point he's thinking, I'm going to be king. But it's another 7 years after this before he becomes king of all Israel. So there's another length of time. Sometimes we're waiting for a promise to come about, and we might see the beginning of that, but it doesn't mean we're going to see the end of it. We just have to keep trusting God faithfully. And David does that. He's not politically maneuvering now, and he's not going to politically maneuver. Well, he'll be wise in some political maneuvering, but not in a way that's manipulating or takes matters into his own hands, if you like. That's what he's going to see in future chapters. All right, enough for chapter 1?
Yep.
All right, we'll talk to you tomorrow. Chapter 2 coming up. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Bible. Wait, what? Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast so you don't miss a single episode. And you can also find us on all the socials. Just search The Bible. Wait, what? And to find out more about our church, just search C3 Camden, C3 Picton, or C3 Thirroul on the web or on the socials. Thanks for being with us today, and we look forward to talking to you on the next episode of The Bible. Wait, what?